My parents always called me the dumb one. While my sister got a full ride to Harvard, I was the college dropout they hid from their wealthy friends. On her graduation day, my father stood in front of 200 elite guests and announced she would inherit everything, including a brand new Tesla and a $16 million mansion. I sat in the back of the room, quietly taking the humiliation. That was until a stranger in a tailored suit walked in, handed me a sealed envelope, and whispered that my $56 million acquisition was complete. My name is Maya. I am 34 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in our sprawling estate in Connecticut, I learned early on that love was conditional. You either fit the perfect family image, or you were a burden. The estate was a massive stone mansion with perfectly manicured gardens, a place designed to impress people who did not actually care about us. Today, that very house was filled to the brim with my parents' closest friends, business partners, and socialites. They were all gathered to celebrate my 26-year-old sister Chloe. She had just graduated from Harvard, fulfilling the destiny my parents had mapped out for her since birth. The backyard had been transformed into a lavish event space. White tents covered the enormous lawn. Waitstaff in crisp uniforms carried trays of expensive champagne and imported caviar. A string quartet played softly near the swimming pool. It was a picture of extreme wealth and absolute perfection. I was sitting as far away from the center of attention as possible. My seat was at a small table near the catering entrance, practically hidden behind a large floral arrangement. I wore a simple black dress I had bought on clearance years ago. I did not want to stand out. I just wanted to make my mandatory appearance and go back to my real life. But in my family, you could never just fade into the background. You had to be used as a prop to make my sister look better. The clinking of a glass drew everyone's attention to the main stage. My father Richard stood at the microphone. He wore a custom-tailored suit and his signature arrogant smile. Beside him stood my mother Vivian, beaming with artificial pride, and in the center stood Chloe holding her Harvard diploma like a trophy. Next to her was Marcus, her husband. Marcus was a highly successful black man who worked in high finance on Wall Street. He was exactly the kind of son-in-law my parents wanted. Rich, ambitious, and incredibly arrogant. My father tapped the microphone to silence the polite chatter of the guests. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his voice booming across the lawn. "Today we celebrate my beautiful daughter Chloe. This Harvard degree proves you are the brain of this family. You are the future of our legacy." He paused, soaking in the applause. "To reward you for your exceptional brilliance, your mother and I have a surprise." I looked up from my glass of water, already knowing whatever came next would be designed to elevate her and diminish me. "The shiny new Tesla parked in the circular driveway is yours," my father announced. "But that is not all. Since you and Marcus are starting your lives together, as the new power couple of the financial world, we want to give you a proper foundation. Therefore, we are officially transferring the deed of this $16 million mansion into your names." The crowd erupted into cheers and gasps. Chloe squealed and threw her arms around Marcus. My mother wiped away a fake tear. I just sat there, my face completely expressionless. But my father was not finished. He looked directly across the sea of tables, his eyes locking onto my hidden corner. "This family needs exceptional people to steer our legacy," he said, his tone turning sharp and cruel. "We need excellence. We do not need someone who struggled through high school. We do not need someone who dropped out of college and wasted their potential. This family belongs to the winners." The silence that followed was suffocating. Hundreds of wealthy guests turned around to look at the back table. They stared at me with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. When he mentioned struggling through high school, I felt the familiar sting of my childhood trauma. I had severe dyslexia. I was not stupid. My brain simply processed letters differently. Instead of getting me a tutor or helping me learn, my parents labeled me lazy. They told their friends I was just going through a rebellious phase. I dropped out of college not because I could not handle the work, but because their constant emotional abuse was destroying my mental health. I left their toxic household and started waitressing 16 hours a day to fund my own projects. I taught myself how to code. I built medical data analytics algorithms that no one else could figure out. But to them, I was just the dumb daughter who served coffee. I watched Marcus whisper something in Chloe's ear, and they both laughed while looking right at me. The humiliation was supposed to break me. It was supposed to make me run out of the party in tears, just like I would have done a decade ago. But I did not move. I just picked up my water glass and took a slow, calm sip. My time to strike was rapidly approaching. I knew that every single person in this lavish backyard was about to witness the absolute destruction of my family fabricated empire. The golden child was about to learn a very hard lesson about reality today. As the applause for my father finally died down, the guests returned to their expensive meals and shallow conversations. The tension in the air remained thick. I kept my eyes focused on the glass of ice water in my hand. Then I heard heavy, confident footsteps approaching my table. I did not need to look up to know who it was. Marcus swaggered over holding a crystal glass of red wine. His expensive designer suit fit him perfectly, highlighting the arrogant posture he always carried. He had that Wall Street finance broker smile plastered on his face, the kind of smile designed to make everyone else feel incredibly small. "Well, if it is not the family ghost," Marcus said, his voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. He stopped right next to my chair and leaned in. Before I could even register his movement, his wrist flicked. A dark crimson splash of Cabernet Sauvignon hit the skirt of my black dress. The cold liquid soaked through the cheap fabric instantly. "Oh, my apologies, sister-in-law," Marcus laughed, not sounding sorry at all. "I did not see you sitting there in the shadows. I was just coming over to give you some career advice. I was going to suggest you apply for a typing job at my investment fund. But then Chloe reminded me you still struggle to read basic sentences." He took a slow sip from his now half-empty glass, looking me up and down with blatant disgust. "Chloe tells me you are completely unemployed right now," Marcus continued, his voice dripping with fake pity. "Living on state welfare, right? A 34-year-old woman with absolutely nothing to her name is such a heavy burden on a family as prestigious as this one. You really should be ashamed of yourself." I looked down at the wine stains spreading across my lap. A decade ago, I would have burst into tears and run out the back gate. I would have let them win. Today, I simply picked up a white cloth napkin and dabbed at the spill with steady hands. I did not break eye contact with him. "I am not on welfare, Marcus," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "I work for myself." Marcus let out a loud barking laugh. "Right. Working for yourself. What does that mean? Making friendship bracelets in a basement. You do not have the brain capacity to run a real business, Maya. You could not even pass freshman college courses." Right on cue, my mother materialized beside Marcus. Vivian always had a sixth sense for whenever I was being attacked, appearing out of thin air just to twist the knife a little deeper. She wore a pearl necklace and a tight, disapproving frown. "Marcus, do not waste your breath," my mother sighed, waving her manicured hand at me. "What else can she possibly do besides embarrass this family? Look at her, showing up to her sister Harvard graduation party looking like a homeless person who wandered in off the street." "I came because you demanded I be here to complete the family photo," I stated calmly. "I demanded you show up and act normal for once," she snapped back. "But clearly that is asking too much. Your father is right. You have always been the defective one. I remember sitting in parent-teacher conferences while you were in high school. The teachers told me you could not even read a simple paragraph without mixing up the letters. You blamed it on dyslexia. Your father and I knew the truth. You were just lazy. You refused to apply yourself." My mother leaned closer, her eyes flashing with malice. "We spent thousands on private tutors and you still failed. You humiliated us every single day. And now seeing Chloe succeed just proves what we always knew. You never had what it takes to be a winner." The gaslighting was textbook. My parents never hired a single tutor for my dyslexia. They never once sat down to help me read. When I reversed letters or struggled to sound out words, my father would lock me in my room and call me stupid. I had to teach myself coping mechanisms. I had to rewire my own brain to process information. That same neurodivergent brain they mocked is exactly what allowed me to see complex data patterns no one else could see. My dyslexia forced me to think outside the box, enabling me to write the revolutionary medical algorithms I was about to sell for millions. But they did not know that yet. "You should really leave, Maya," Marcus said, crossing his arms over his chest. "You are bringing down the mood of the entire party." "Chloe has a lot of important people to network with today. My colleagues from the firm are here. The last thing we need is a college dropout begging them for loose change." "I have not asked anyone for a single cent," I said, dropping the stained napkin onto the table. "You do not have to ask. Your sheer presence is a drain on our resources," my mother scoffed. "You are 34 years old, Maya. You have no husband, no career, no property, and no future. You are a complete zero. You should get on your knees and thank us for even allowing you to breathe the same air as your sister today." Marcus smirked, clearly enjoying the tag team assault. "If you need a few dollars for the bus ride back to your miserable apartment, just let me know. I can spare some pocket change for the family charity case. Or maybe you can just walk. It might build some character." I sat perfectly still, absorbing their venom. I let them dig their graves deeper. Every cruel word out of their mouths was just another layer of justification for what I was about to do. They felt so powerful standing over me, weaponizing my past struggles, entirely convinced of their own superiority. They thought my silence was submission. They mistook my calmness for defeat. "Are you even listening to us?" my mother demanded, her voice rising in frustration at my lack of reaction. "Or is your brain too slow to process the words? I hear you perfectly loud and clear." "Mother," I replied, my voice icy and precise, "I am just marveling at how confident you both are in your assumptions about my life." Marcus scoffed, shaking his head. "Assumptions. It is objective reality, Maya. Numbers do not lie. Chloe has a Harvard degree and a $16 million estate. I manage a high-yield investment fund. You have a stained dress and a high school reading level. The math is pretty simple." "You are right about one thing, Marcus," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Numbers never lie." Before Marcus could formulate a snappy comeback, the atmosphere in the backyard shifted abruptly. The string quartet stopped playing. The low hum of networking conversations halted. Several guests near the entrance parted like the Red Sea. I looked past Marcus' shoulder and saw him. A tall, distinguished older man in a sharp charcoal gray suit was walking purposefully across the lawn. He carried a sleek leather briefcase and exuded an aura of absolute authority. He was not a guest. He was not a socialite. He was the senior legal counsel for the largest medical conglomerate on the East Coast, and he was walking directly toward my table. The sudden hush over the immediate area was palpable. My father Richard noticed the approaching figure first. His eyes widened in recognition, and the cruel sneer he had worn just moments ago melted instantly into a mask of obsequious charm. He smoothed the lapels of his custom suit and stepped away from the main stage, walking briskly toward our section. Marcus followed his gaze, and his chest puffed out. "I know him well," Marcus whispered to my mother, his voice buzzing with greedy excitement. "That is Alexander Sterling. He is the chief legal counsel for Vanguard Medical Enterprises. They manage billions in assets. He must have heard about my recent promotions at the fund. Or maybe he is here to scout Chloe for their executive board." Mother Vivian gasped softly, her eyes gleaming with dollar signs. She immediately turned back to me, her face twisting with panic and disgust. "Get up!" she hissed, kicking my ankle under the table. "Get up and go hide in the kitchen right now, Maya. A man of his stature is walking over here, and you are sitting there covered in cheap wine, looking like a complete disaster. I will not let your pathetic existence ruin a major networking opportunity for your brother-in-law." I did not move. I remained perfectly seated, keeping my hands folded neatly on my lap. "Are you deaf?" Vivian snarled, leaning down so her face was inches from mine. If you embarrass Marcus in front of Mr. Sterling, I swear I will have security drag you out of this estate. Move your lazy, useless body right now before I force you out myself. Marcus stepped directly in front of my table, physically blocking me from view. He buttoned his suit jacket and pasted on his most winning Wall Street smile, ready to intercept the VIP guest. My father arrived at the same moment, flanked by a glowing Chloe, who clutched her Harvard diploma tightly against her chest. "Mr. Sterling," my father announced, projecting his voice so the surrounding wealthy guests could hear his important connection. "What an absolute honor to have you at our home. We are celebrating my brilliant daughter Chloe today. She just graduated from Harvard, and we are thrilled you could join us." Marcus thrust his hand forward eagerly. "Alexander, it is a pleasure to see you outside the boardroom. I am Marcus, managing director at the Apex Fund. We have a few mutual associates in the city. I would love to schedule a lunch to discuss some high-yield portfolios that perfectly align with Vanguard Medical aggressive expansion strategy." Alexander Sterling did not slow his pace. He did not extend his hand to Marcus. He did not even acknowledge my father greeting. He walked straight through their carefully orchestrated blockade, forcing Marcus to stumble backward to avoid a collision. The smug smiles on my family faces shattered instantly, replaced by sheer bewilderment. He stopped directly in front of my hidden table. The surrounding crowd went dead silent, watching the bizarre scene unfold. The chief legal counsel of a multi-billion-dollar medical empire had just ignored the wealthy estate owner and the arrogant finance director to stand before a woman sitting in a wine-stained dress. Vivian let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh, trying to salvage the situation. "Oh, Mr. Sterling, I am so sorry about her. This is just our troubled older daughter. She is a bit slow and currently unemployed. Please do not mind her. Let us move over to the VIP lounge where we have vintage champagne waiting." Sterling slowly turned his head to look at my mother. His gaze was so cold and commanding that Vivian physically shrank back, gripping my father's arm for support. Unemployed Sterling repeated, his voice resonating with deep, professional authority. "That is a rather fascinating way to describe the founder and chief architect of the most revolutionary predictive medical data platform of the decade." Marcus let out a forced scoff, trying to regain control of his audience. "Sir, I think you have the wrong person. Maya does not know the first thing about data. She dropped out of college. She can barely read a legal contract. You are definitely confusing her with someone else." Sterling turned his attention to Marcus, looking him up and down with clinical precision. "I never confuse brilliance with incompetence, young man," Sterling said sharply. "I suggest you step back before you embarrass yourself further. I am not here for you. I am not here for your father-in-law. I am here on official corporate business for the only person in this estate who actually matters." He turned back to me. The harshness in his eyes vanished, replaced immediately by profound respect. He bowed deeply, bending at the waist in a gesture of absolute deference that sent a shockwave through the watching guests. Madam Sterling said loudly enough for everyone within a 50-foot radius to hear, "The board of directors sends their highest regards and deepest gratitude. The final signatures cleared 5 minutes ago. The transaction is complete." He opened his sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a heavy sealed envelope made of thick cream-colored parchment. He held it out to me with both hands. I took the envelope, feeling the weight of 5 years of blood, sweat, and tears resting in my palms. The relentless nights I spent coding in a freezing studio apartment. The days I went hungry to pay for server hosting. The countless moments I had to silence the trauma of my parents calling me stupid just so I could focus on building my algorithms. It was all inside this envelope. Inside this. Chloe pushed her way past Marcus, her face red with indignation. "What transaction?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "What is he talking about, Maya? You do not own a company. You serve coffee. You are a nobody. What is in that envelope?" I broke the wax seal on the heavy parchment envelope slowly. I slowly pulled the thick stack of documents from the envelope. The crisp sound of the heavy paper seemed to echo across the silent lawn. The top page featured the embossed gold logo of Vanguard Medical Enterprises. Below it was a finalized bill of sale and a bank transfer confirmation. Alexander Sterling leaned down slightly and lowered his voice so only I and the immediate circle of my family could hear him. "The wire transfer has officially cleared your private accounts, madam," he whispered, his tone laced with profound respect. "The acquisition of your medical data platform is completely finalized. You are entirely liquid. Vanguard is honored to integrate your life-saving architecture into our global network." I stared at the crisp, black ink on the page, letting the reality of the moment wash over me. For more than a decade, I had been the family punching bag. I was the cautionary tale my mother whispered about at her bridge club meetings. I was the dark stain on their pristine reputation. My father Richard stepped forward, his face a mask of absolute bewilderment. He physically inserted himself between me and Sterling, trying to reassert his dominance as the patriarch of the family. "Mr. Sterling, there must be a catastrophic mistake here," my father stammered, his face turning an unhealthy shade of pale as he forced a nervous chuckle. "You have walked up to the wrong table. My daughter Maya has no corporate standing whatsoever. She does not own a medical platform. She has no background in technology or business. She dropped out of her freshman year. You are clearly the victim of some kind of identity fraud." Sterling slowly turned his attention to my father. The senior lawyer expression was a masterclass in corporate intimidation. "I do not make mistakes," Richard Sterling replied, his voice dropping the polite facade he had maintained earlier. "And Vanguard Medical certainly does not hand over highly sensitive acquisition contracts to random individuals. We have had our eyes on your daughter firm for over 2 years. Her algorithm has consistently outperformed every diagnostic model developed by our own elite engineering teams." My mother, Vivian, let out a strangled gasp. "This is impossible," Vivian whispered, her eyes darting frantically around the crowd of wealthy guests who were hanging onto every word. "Maya is just a waitress. She has nothing. Chloe is the successful one. Chloe just graduated from Harvard today. If your company is looking to acquire brilliant minds, you should be speaking to Chloe and her husband Marcus." "Stop talking to her," Chloe shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. "This is my graduation party. This is my day to shine. Stop making this about her. She is probably running a scam. She is a liar and a failure. Get her out of my house right now before I call the police." Sterling looked at my sister with a mixture of pity and absolute disdain. "A failure," Sterling repeated, shaking his head slowly. "The woman sitting before you just revolutionized predictive diagnostics for the entire medical industry. The sheer magnitude of her intellectual property is staggering. I would advise you to speak to her with the respect she has thoroughly earned." The whispering among the guests grew steadily louder, echoing across the manicured lawn. The wealthy socialites and business magnates, who had just been blindly applauding Chloe and Marcus, were now straining their necks to get a better look at me. The power dynamic in the backyard was physically shifting right before my eyes. The invisible hierarchy my parents had so carefully constructed over 34 years was cracking right down the middle, exposing the rotting core of their favoritism. Everyone in attendance was realizing that the true genius of the family had been forced to sit at the catering table. Marcus could not handle it. His fragile Wall Street ego was taking a direct hit, and his aggressive instincts took over. He stepped forward, his chest puffed out, trying to physically intimidate me, just as he had done when he deliberately spilled the wine. "Do not listen to this nonsense," Marcus sneered, waving his hand dismissively at Sterling. "I work in high finance. I know how corporate mergers work. Vanguard does not acquire basement projects from uneducated waitresses. It is a pathetic bluff to steal attention away from the real winners today." She probably downloaded some fake legal templates off the internet to make herself look important because she is jealous of Chloe getting a $16 million mansion today. She is sick in the head. Marcus slammed his hands down on my small table, leaning aggressively into my personal space. "Let me see those papers," Maya Marcus demanded, his voice dripping with condescending authority. "You probably signed away your life savings for a timeshare scam. Hand them over right now so a real finance director can tell you how badly you just ruined your pathetic little life." I kept my posture perfectly relaxed. I looked up into Marcus' arrogant eyes and offered him a cold, empty smile. I did not pull the documents away. I did not try to protect them from his grasping hands. I simply held them loosely, allowing the top page with its impressive gold seal to remain clearly visible to everyone. "You want to see the papers, Marcus?" I asked, my voice steady and quiet. He did not wait for my permission. Driven by his desperate need to prove me wrong and reassert his dominance over the family narrative, Marcus reached across the table and violently and quickly snatched the heavy parchment documents right out of my hands. He ripped the top page away from the stack, holding it up to the sunlight so he could read the bold print and expose my supposed lie to the entire party. I sat back in my chair, folded my hands neatly in my lap, and watched the exact second his arrogant reality completely and utterly shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. Marcus cleared his throat loudly, preparing to deliver the ultimate punchline to his cruel joke. He held the document high, making sure everyone around our table was paying attention. "Let us see what kind of fantasy world you are living in, Maya," he declared. "Let us read this classified acquisition contract from Vanguard Medical. I bet it is a coupon for a free psychiatric evaluation." A few of his finance friends in the crowd chuckled. Marcus brought the heavy parchment closer to his face, adjusting his stance. "This official document confirms the total acquisition of—" He started reading, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The predictive data architecture wholly owned by Maya." He stopped. The mocking smirk on his face twitched. His eyes darted back to the top of the page. He blinked rapidly as if the sunlight reflecting off the crisp white paper was playing tricks on his vision. He read the line again silently. Then his eyes moved down to the bolded financial figures at the center of the contract. "Read it, Marcus," Chloe demanded, crossing her arms over her expensive designer dress. "Read it so everyone can hear what a desperate liar she is." Marcus did not respond. His mouth hung slightly open. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking physically ill. His normally impeccable posture slumped, and the hand holding the Vanguard medical document began to tremble. The heavy parchment shook, making a faint rustling sound in the sudden quiet of the backyard. "What is wrong with you?" Chloe huffed, stepping closer to her husband. "Give it to me. I will read it." Chloe snatched the paper out of his shaking hand. She let out an annoyed sigh and held the document up. "This official contract confirms the final sale and transfer of intellectual property," she read. "The agreed-upon compensation for the sole owner, Maya, is authorized for immediate transfer in the amount of—" Chloe froze. Her eyes widened to an unnatural degree. She let out a sharp, strangled gasp, dropping the paper slightly before gripping it again. She stared at the bold black numbers printed across the page. "In the amount of what my mother Vivian," urged, her voice laced with growing panic. "Chloe, what does it say? Tell me it is a fake." Chloe could not speak. Her perfectly manicured hands were shaking just as violently as Marcus had been. She looked from the paper to me, her eyes filled with absolute horror and disbelief. "Allow me to clarify, since my sister seems to have lost her ability to speak," I said. "The document confirms that Vanguard Medical Enterprises has acquired my company for exactly $56 million. The funds have already been wired. The check has cleared. The money is sitting in my private accounts right now." The silence that fell over the estate was absolute. 200 wealthy guests, business partners, and elite socialites stood completely paralyzed. The number hit the crowd like a physical shockwave. $56 million. It was a sum of money that dwarfed the net worth of almost everyone in attendance. "No," Marcus breathed, stepping backward away from my table. "That is not possible. You do not have a degree. You waitressed for years. You cannot just build a tech company out of nowhere." My father Richard finally grabbed the document from Chloe, trembling hands. He scanned the legal text, his eyes darting back and forth across the page. He flipped to the second page, looking at the bank transfer confirmations. His hands began to shake, mirroring the shock of his golden child. "This is a verified wire transfer," my father whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "It is real. $56 million. All in cash, completely liquid." My mother Vivian let out a soft whimpering sound. She covered her mouth with both hands, staring at me as if I had suddenly transformed. The daughter she had relentlessly mocked, the daughter she had called a failure, was now richer than the entire family combined. Alexander Sterling stepped forward, adjusting his gray suit jacket. "The financial figures are completely accurate," he stated firmly, addressing my father. "Maya designed an algorithm that identifies complex autoimmune diseases years before symptoms physically manifest. Her system is already saving thousands of lives across the country." Vanguard recognized the unprecedented value of her intellectual property. 56 million was actually a highly competitive negotiation on our part. She is a generational talent. The guests began to whisper fiercely. The narrative was shifting so fast my family could not contain the damage. The wealthy investors who had been congratulating Marcus on his small finance promotions were now looking at him with pity. He had just tried to bully a self-made tech multimillionaire by offering her pocket change for a bus ride. He looked like an absolute clown. Chloe's face turned a deep, blotchy red. She looked down at her Harvard diploma, which she was still clutching against her chest. Just minutes ago, it had been the ultimate symbol of her superiority. My father had literally just gifted her a $16 million mansion and a Tesla because she was supposed to be the brilliant future of the family. Now her small achievements looked completely insignificant. "This cannot be happening," Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with hysterical rage. "You stole this! You must have stolen this idea from someone else. You are dyslexic. You cannot even read properly. You are the dumb one of the family. Everyone knows that. You are a fraud." I slowly stood up from my chair. I smoothed down the skirt of my cheap black dress, the one Marcus had intentionally stained with red wine. I looked directly into my sister's panicked, jealous eyes, and I felt absolutely nothing but cold, hard determination. "I am not a fraud, Chloe," I said quietly. "But you are about to learn exactly what happens when you underestimate the person you spent your entire life trying to destroy." I took a step forward, closing the physical distance between me and my sister. "You call my dyslexia a failure, Chloe?" I stated, my voice projecting effortlessly across the silent lawn. "But that same neurodivergent brain you mocked is exactly what allowed me to process complex data patterns your Ivy League textbooks never covered. While you were busy memorizing flashcards to pass multiple-choice exams, I was building a neural network that predicts catastrophic heart failures. My brain does not read letters the way yours does. It reads variables. It sees connections. It processes pure logic. You spent your entire life trying to be the smartest person in the room by putting me down. But all you did was prove how incredibly small your world really is." I turned my attention to my mother. Vivian was shaking her hands tightly clutched around her designer purse. She looked like a cornered animal, realizing her apex predator status was a complete illusion. "You called me a burden, Mother," I continued, keeping my tone analytical and devoid of any emotional warmth. "You told all these people I was living on welfare. But let us talk about real financial burdens. Let us talk about the truth behind this lavish party. I know about the second mortgage you secretly took out on this estate just to afford that new Chanel bag on your arm and the ice sculpture melting by the pool. You mortgaged your own future to maintain the illusion of extreme wealth. You sacrificed your financial security just so you could look down on people like me." Vivian gasped, her face flushing a deep crimson as the surrounding guests began to whisper furiously. The secret of her severe debt was out. "You threw me out of this house with absolutely nothing," I reminded her, my voice ringing clear and sharp. "You gave me 1 week to pack my bags because my learning disability embarrassed your bridge club friends. You told me I would end up begging on the streets. I did not beg. I put on a cheap uniform and waitressed 16-hour shifts at a diner across town. I saved every single dollar I earned while smelling like stale coffee and grease. I ate ramen noodles for months on end so I could pay for server space to host my data models. I sacrificed my youth, my sleep, and my pride to fund the algorithms that Vanguard Medical just validated for $56 million. I built an empire from the absolute rock bottom you pushed me into." My father Richard looked physically sick. The patriarch, who had just spent the last hour bragging about his brilliant legacy, was now sweating profusely under the harsh afternoon sun. I shifted my gaze to him, locking eyes with the man who had called me defective. "You stood on that stage and told everyone this family belongs to the winners," I said, pointing toward the microphone. "You praised Chloe and Marcus as the new power couple. You gifted them a $16 million mansion to steer your so-called legacy. But what legacy is that exactly, Richard? A legacy of massive debt. A legacy of superficial bragging rights. You discarded your own daughter because she did not fit into your perfect country club aesthetic. You broke me down mentally and emotionally until I had no choice but to leave. Let us talk about what success really means." I continued pacing slowly in front of my family. "You value status symbols. You value fancy cars and massive houses bought on credit. I value impact. The system I coded in my freezing studio apartment is currently deployed in over 40 hospitals. It scans patient vitals and alerts doctors to subtle changes that indicate impending organ failure. I took the pain and isolation you forced upon me, and I channeled it into something that actually saves human lives." While Marcus was busy moving paper money around to enrich hedge fund managers, I was writing code that prevents mothers from dying in the intensive care unit. And while Chloe was busy attending elite fraternity mixers, I was negotiating data security protocols with federal health regulators. Vivian tried to speak, but her voice was a mere squeak. "Maya, please," she stammered, her eyes darting nervously toward the wealthy investors watching our every move. "Do not do this here. Not in front of our guests." "You brought the guests?" I reminded her, instantly shutting down her plea for mercy. "You put me at the catering table. You allowed your son-in-law to pour wine on my dress and mock my intelligence. You wanted a public spectacle to assert your dominance. Now you have one. You just do not like the narrative anymore because you are no longer the one holding the pen." Alexander Sterling stood quietly at my side, a silent sentinel of corporate power validating every single word I spoke. His presence alone verified my claims, making it impossible for Richard or Vivian to gaslight me or dismiss my speech as a mental breakdown. The guests were completely captivated. Several influential business partners who had been nodding along to my father's speech earlier were now looking at me with immense respect. They recognized the sheer grit and intellectual brilliance required to build a multi-million-dollar tech acquisition from absolute scratch. I looked down at the wine stain on my dress and let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Marcus, you told me earlier that numbers do not lie. I agreed with you. My bank account now holds $56 million. Your father-in-law estate is drowning in secret mortgages. Your wife's Ivy League degree just got overshadowed by a college dropout. The math is indeed very simple. I am the absolute winner of this miserable family. I just chose to play a completely different game. A game where real intelligence and unrelenting hard work will always conquer superficial vanity and arrogant entitlement every single time without fail." The silence following my declaration hung in the air for only a few seconds before the reality of $56 million completely rewired my parents' brains. I watched my father Richard process the magnitude of my liquidity. The panic sweating on his forehead evaporated, replaced by an eager gleam in his eyes. He stepped away from Chloe, abandoning his golden child without a backward glance. He squared his shoulders and walked toward me, projecting a sickeningly warm, fatherly aura that made my stomach churn. "Maya, my brilliant girl," Richard announced, his voice vibrating with forced affection. He projected his words, ensuring the wealthy investors watching us heard his sudden pivot. "I knew it. I always knew you had this fire inside you. Everything we ever did was to ignite that spark. We had to be tough on you. We had to push you out of the nest so you could learn to fly. Look at you now, soaring higher than anyone else in this family." My mother Vivian was right behind him. The woman who just 10 minutes ago threatened to have security drag me out of the estate was now wiping away fresh theatrical tears of joy. She reached out, trying to grab my hands, but I took a deliberate step back. Vivian grasped empty air, but seamlessly transitioned the failed gesture into a dramatic clasp over her heart. "Oh, my sweet Maya!" Vivian cried, trembling with manufactured emotion. You have no idea how hard it was for me to play the bad guy. When you left college, it broke my heart. We knew a mind like yours needed adversity to unlock its potential. We gave you independence. We sacrificed our relationship with you so you could build this incredible empire. We are so proud of you. I stared at them, feeling a visceral and heavy wave of disgust. They were retroactively taking credit for my trauma. They were attempting to rebrand 2 decades of emotional abuse, neglect, and cruelty as a calculated parenting strategy. They wanted the elite crowd to believe my success was simply the final phase of their master plan. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial business tone. He shot a quick, nervous glance at Alexander Sterling before turning his full attention back to me. Maya, you have achieved a monumental victory today, Richard whispered, fixated on the Vanguard medical documents. $56 million is an incredible foundation, but cash loses value to inflation every day. You need institutional backing. The family business is primed for a massive expansion phase. If you inject a portion of your capital into my holdings, we could dominate the real estate market. We can build a dynasty together, the ultimate father-daughter powerhouse. He was sweating again. This time it was the sweat of a desperate drowning man thrown a life raft. I knew exactly what was happening behind his greedy eyes. Richard's business was actively failing. His aggressive real estate investments had gone underwater months ago. He wanted to use my $56 million to plug the bleeding holes in his sinking ship. He needed my blood money to save his superficial country club lifestyle. Chloe watched this betrayal unfold with her mouth hanging open. The Harvard graduate who was supposed to be the center of the universe today was now completely sidelined by her own parents. Mom. Dad, what are you doing? Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with pure outrage. You just gave me this house. You just said I was the future. Why are you begging her for money? She is a liar. She probably slept with someone at Vanguard to get this deal. Vivian spun around and glared at her favorite daughter. Chloe, stop being so dramatic, Vivian snapped, dropping the sweet motherly tone instantly. Your sister just secured a massive corporate buyout. Show some respect. We are discussing high-level family finances right now. Do not interrupt adults when they are talking business. The betrayal hit Chloe like a physical blow. The golden child was realizing that her parents' love was entirely transactional. Her Ivy League degree meant nothing compared to the raw, untethered power of 56 million liquid dollars. Marcus, ever the opportunistic finance shark, saw the tides turning and adjusted his strategy. He smoothed his tie, stepping away from his furious wife, and approached me with a calculated expression. He ignored the fact that he had deliberately ruined my dress moments prior. Maya, congratulations, Marcus said, offering me a slick, professional nod. You played this incredibly close to the chest. That is a brilliant trait for an entrepreneur. As a managing director, I can offer you exclusive access to private equity portfolios. We can waive our management fees for family. Let us set up a meeting on Monday to discuss wealth preservation. I can help you protect this capital from predatory taxes. I looked at the three of them. My father desperate to steal my money to save his bankrupt firm. My mother desperate to claim my success as her own parenting victory. My brother-in-law desperate to earn a commission off my life work. They were circling me like starved vultures blinded by greed. They honestly believed their fake affection could erase a lifetime of trauma. They thought my money was just an extension of their own assets waiting to be claimed. I looked at Richard, who was standing there waiting for me to accept his offer of a father-daughter dynasty. I looked at Vivian, pressing her hands together in a gesture of fake maternal love. I looked at Marcus quietly, calculating his massive potential commission on my trauma. The sheer audacity of their hypocrisy was impressive, but they fundamentally misunderstood the person standing in front of them. I was not the scared little dyslexic girl seeking their approval anymore. I was a data architect. I analyzed patterns and I predicted outcomes. The only outcome I saw for this family was absolute destruction. I stared at the three of them, allowing the silence to stretch. I wanted them to feel the full weight of their own desperation. The wealthy crowd had gone completely still, hanging on to every breath. They were waiting to see if the abused daughter would finally cave to the pressure of family duty. They were waiting to see if blood was truly thicker than water. I turned to my father first. Richard, you spent my entire childhood telling me I lacked the intelligence to manage a simple college schedule. Now you want me to hand over millions to save your sinking real estate firm. Do you honestly believe I am unaware of your massive debt? You are over-leveraged on 3 commercial properties downtown. You took out a second mortgage on this very estate just to pay for Chloe Harvard tuition and her extravagant lifestyle. You are not offering me a father-daughter dynasty. You are begging for a financial bailout because you are completely bankrupt. My father's face turned the color of ash. He took a stumbling step backward, his mouth opening and closing silently. The investors nearby gasped. The powerful patriarch was exposed as a total fraud. I shifted my gaze to Marcus. 5 minutes ago, you poured Cabernet over my dress and called me a beggar. You suggested I walk home to build character. Now you want exclusive access to my private equity. You want to waive your management fees for family. I laughed, a sharp, cold sound. We are not family, Marcus. We are just 2 people standing in a backyard. I would not trust you to manage a lemonade stand, let alone a $56 million portfolio. You are a glorified salesman who married a sinking ship. Marcus' jaw clenched hard. He looked around at his finance colleagues who were now shaking their heads in disgust. His professional reputation was actively evaporating in the afternoon sun. Vivian was trembling, her eyes wide with frantic panic. She saw her perfect world collapsing and she went for the only weapon she had left. Emotional manipulation. She lunged forward, throwing her arms open in a desperate attempt to pull me into a motherly embrace. She wanted the crowd to see a touching reconciliation. She wanted to physically force me into submission. Maya, please. Vivian sobbed loudly, her voice cracking with manufactured grief. We are your parents. We gave you life. We love you so much. Please do not do this to us. I did not let her touch me. I took a deliberate step backward, raising my hand to halt her approach. Vivian stumbled, grasping at empty air. Do not touch me, mother, I said, my voice carrying the freezing authority of absolute certainty. You do not love me. You love the numbers printed on this contract. You love the idea of $56 million saving you from social ruin. You spent 34 years treating me like a disease you could not cure. You threw me onto the street because my dyslexia did not fit your country club aesthetic. You broke every single bond of trust a mother is supposed to build with her child. Vivian stood frozen, her arms still awkwardly suspended in the air. You want to play the loving mother now? I continued, staring directly into her terrified eyes. You want to claim my success as your parenting victory. But we both know the truth. You are just a desperate woman trying to survive the consequences of her own cruelty. Let me make this clear for everyone standing here today. I held up the Vanguard medical contract, the gold seal catching the sunlight. This is my money, not yours, I stated firmly. I earned every cent of it while you were busy trying to erase my existence. You will not see a dime of it. Not to save your bankrupt business, not to pay off your secret mortgages, not to fund Chloe's luxury lifestyle. You cut me off 5 years ago, Vivian. Consider this my official acceptance of your terms. I turned to Alexander Sterling, who was standing quietly with a respectful posture. Mr. Sterling, I said, offering him a polite nod. Thank you for delivering the final paperwork. The transaction is complete. I have nothing left to do here. It is my absolute privilege, Madam Sterling replied, bowing his head slightly. My team will be in touch on Monday to begin the integration process. Have a safe journey home. I turned my back on my family. I did not look at Richard sweating in his custom suit. I did not look at Vivian sobbing into her hands. I did not look at Marcus seething with humiliated rage. And I did not look at Chloe clutching a Harvard degree that now felt entirely worthless. I walked across the manicured lawn, my head held high. The crowd of elite guests parted from me automatically. They stepped aside, offering me a wide, clear path toward the heavy iron gates. No one whispered insults. No one looked at me with pity. They looked at me with absolute awe. I was the architect of my own empire, and they recognized the raw, undeniable power of a woman who had conquered her demons. As I reached the driveway, I heard the loud, chaotic buzzing of conversations erupt behind me. The guests were already turning on my parents. Whispers about bankruptcy, second mortgages, and emotional abuse filled the air. The elite facade my family had built was completely destroyed. They were left standing in the ruins of their own arrogance, exposed as cruel, desperate frauds. I opened the door to my waiting car. I slid into the comfortable leather seat and placed the Vanguard contract neatly on my lap. The engine roared to life and the driver pulled smoothly away from the curb. I watched the $16 million mansion fade from the rearview mirror. I left them with nothing but the devastating truth. I was finally free. The weekend passed smoothly. Now I woke up on a Sunday morning without the suffocating weight of my family expectations crushing my chest. I spent the day reviewing the integration protocols with the Vanguard medical engineering team from my penthouse overlooking the city skyline. Alexander Sterling had been true to his word. The transition was seamless. By Monday morning, I was ready to dive back into the data architecture that had become my life work. I walked into my agency headquarters, greeted by the familiar hum of servers and the quiet focus of my brilliant engineering team. I poured a cup of black coffee, letting the warmth ground me. My lead cybersecurity architect, David, burst into my glass-enclosed office without knocking. His face was pale, and he gripped his tablet so tightly his knuckles were white. "We have a massive breach," he said, sliding the device across my desk. "It is a coordinated smear campaign. Someone bypassed our secondary social media authentication protocols and took over all our public-facing corporate accounts. They are flooding the industry forums, too." I set my coffee mug down and looked at the screen. I simply engaged my analytical mind. The screen displayed my company official page, but the professional logo had been replaced with a distorted, humiliating photo of me from high school. The caption underneath was written in bold, aggressive text designed to incite maximum outrage. The post read as a so-called whistleblower exposing the Vanguard medical acquisition. "Do not believe the hype," it screamed. "Maya is a fraud. She is a known high school dropout with severe learning disabilities who cannot even write a basic line of code. She manipulated a brilliant software engineer she was dating, stole his proprietary algorithms while he slept, and claimed them as her own. Vanguard just paid $56 million for stolen intellectual property. Demand an investigation." The post had already been shared thousands of times. I scrolled down to see fake screenshots of fabricated text messages supposedly between me and this non-existent ex-boyfriend. They had even photoshopped fraudulent email timestamps to make it look like I was blackmailing him. It was a digital assassination attempt. I knew instantly who was behind it. Chloe. My golden child sister could not handle the fact that I had overshadowed her precious Harvard graduation. She could not accept that the sister she had bullied for decades was entirely self-made, so she threw a massive digital tantrum. She wanted to destroy my professional reputation before the ink on my Vanguard contract even dried. But Chloe was not smart enough to execute a coordinated cyber attack on her own. She needed resources. She needed someone with access to high-level media networks and bot farms. She needed Marcus. My arrogant brother-in-law had weaponized his Wall Street connections to amplify the smear campaign. He was using his firm digital infrastructure to push the fake narrative to major medical investors and tech journalists. They were trying to create a panic among Vanguard shareholders, hoping the board of directors would freeze my funds and reverse the acquisition out of fear of a public scandal. They wanted to force me to my knees. They wanted me to crawl back to them, begging for mercy, offering to share my wealth to make the bad press go away. I turned back to the glowing screen, reading the vicious comments flooding in from internet trolls and misinformed industry insiders. The fake screenshots were meticulously crafted. They used my actual email signature block, which meant Chloe had dug through my old personal accounts or intercepted my mail at my parents' house before I cut them off. The fictional ex-boyfriend they invented was a perfect archetype designed to discredit women in tech. He was painted as the true tortured genius, while I was cast as the manipulative seductress who slept her way to a $56 million buyout. The misogyny of their attack was so painfully predictable. Chloe, who had spent her entire life relying on our parents' money and her husband's status, could not fathom a reality where a woman succeeded purely through raw intellect and hard work. She had to invent a man to explain my success, because accepting my brilliance meant confronting her own mediocrity. My phone began to vibrate relentlessly on my desk. The notifications stacked up like a cascading waterfall, journalists requesting comments, Vanguard executives asking for clarification. And right in the middle of it all, a text message from an unregistered burner number. The message was short and dripping with arrogant malice. Give us 20 million by tomorrow or the major tech blogs pick up the story. Your choice, drop out. David hovered nervously near my desk. Should I draft a public denial? He asked, his fingers hovering over his tablet. Should we issue a cease and desist order to the social media platforms immediately? I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and steepled my fingers. No, I said, my voice perfectly calm. A public denial makes us look defensive. It validates their attack. They want us to panic. They want us to engage in a messy public shouting match because drama is the only language my family speaks. We are not going to play their game. I turned my monitor toward David. I need you to trace the IP addresses of the original login bypass. Find the root server that deployed the bot network. Marcus is arrogant, but he is not a tech genius. He is a finance bro who thinks money can buy digital anonymity. He definitely left digital trails for us to uncover today. I want every single keystroke tracked, mapped, and documented. David nodded, a fierce grin spreading across his face. He loved a good hunt. I will have the source code dismantled in an hour, he promised, before sprinting out of the office. I picked up my coffee and took a slow sip. Marcus and Chloe thought they were playing checkers. They had no idea I designed the chessboard. The morning light was harsh, reflecting off the glass of my office building. I was staring at a notification on my primary banking app that made my blood run cold. An administrative hold had been placed on several secondary investment accounts. We were talking about $7 million temporarily frozen. Before I could even begin to trace the origin of the hold, my private office line rang. It was not a number I recognized, but I knew exactly who it was. I picked up the receiver and pressed it to my ear. "Well, good morning, genius Marcus," said his voice dripping with condescending amusement. "Did you check your accounts yet? I hear there is a little snag in your cash flow today." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my breathing perfectly steady. "You are playing a very dangerous game, Marcus." He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "I am playing the game I know best, Maya. High finance is a blood sport, and you just walked onto the field wearing water wings. You see, while you were busy trying to play the heroic victim, I made a few phone calls to my friends at the regulatory agencies. I tipped them off about some highly suspicious intellectual property transfers right before your Vanguard acquisition. All it takes is one anonymous whistleblower complaint alleging corporate espionage and bam! Accounts frozen pending investigation. You have absolutely zero proof," I stated, my voice flat. "My algorithms are patented and verified. Vanguard conducted a thorough 6-month due diligence process." "Proof?" Marcus scoffed. "Oh, Maya, you really are a complete idiot. This is Wall Street. We do not need proof to bleed you dry. We just need enough smoke to make the investors think there is a fire. You see, Vanguard shareholders hate risk. If this fake scandal drags on, they will demand the board claw back your acquisition funds. Your shiny new $56 million will be locked in litigation for the next 10 years. You will be bankrupt paying legal fees before you ever see a courtroom." He paused, letting the threat hang in the heavy silence. I could hear the arrogant satisfaction radiating through the phone line. He honestly believed he had me cornered. "So here is the deal," Marcus continued, dropping the playful tone. "You are going to wire $20 million to a secure offshore holding company I control by 5 p.m. tomorrow. You will draft it as an anonymous angel investment. You do that, and magically all the whistleblower complaints disappear. The social media attacks stop. The frozen funds are released. You get to keep your little tech company and go back to playing CEO. If you do not, I will ensure every single dollar you have is tied up in federal court until you are forced to sell your algorithms for pennies just to pay your rent. You are attempting to extort me for $20 million, I said, ensuring the words were clear. Extortion is such an ugly word, Marcus replied smoothly. Consider it an aggressive consulting fee. I am teaching you a valuable lesson about corporate vulnerability. You are a high school dropout, Maya. You got lucky with one piece of code. You do not belong in this arena. You are too stupid to survive a real financial war. So pay the toll and walk away before I completely obliterate your life. He hung up the phone without waiting for my response. The line went dead, leaving a dial tone echoing in my quiet office. I placed the receiver back on its cradle. The audacity of his threat was staggering, but it was also incredibly predictable. Marcus operated entirely on the belief that raw intimidation and financial manipulation could crush any opposition. He assumed my dyslexia made me intellectually inferior and easily frightened by complex financial mechanisms. He fundamentally misunderstood how my brain worked. I did not see intimidation. I saw data points. I saw a vulnerable system that he had just recklessly exposed. David, my cybersecurity lead, was already standing in the doorway, his tablet in hand. He had heard my side of the conversation. I traced the root origin of the social media bot attacks. David reported, his eyes burning with focused intensity. The proxy servers point directly to a private communications firm heavily subsidized by the Apex Fund. That is Marcus' firm. I nodded slowly, processing the information. Marcus is using his company infrastructure to execute a personal extortion campaign against a major corporate entity. That is not just unethical, David. That is a federal crime. David tapped his screen, bringing up a secondary display. I also dug into the anonymous whistleblower complaints filed with the regulatory agencies this morning. They were submitted through an encrypted portal, but the IP address pinged back to a server farm that handles data routing for the Apex Fund executive branch. He used his own company network to file the fake lawsuits. A cold smile touched the corners of my mouth. Marcus had just handed me the keys to his absolute destruction. He was so blinded by his own arrogance and his desperate need to cover his father-in-law bankruptcy that he had gotten sloppy. He assumed because he wore a $1,000 suit he was untouchable. David, I said, standing up from my desk, I want a full comprehensive sweep of the Apex Fund public financial disclosures for the past 36 months. Cross-reference their reported yields against their actual market performance data. David frowned slightly. You think he is cooking the books? I know he is, I replied, pulling up a blank data modeling template on my main monitor. A man who resorts to $20 million extortion within 24 hours of losing a real estate investment is a man who is completely underwater. He is bleeding capital, and he is using client funds to cover his margins. I want every single transaction mapped, every discrepancy flagged. I want his entire financial existence laid bare on my servers by tomorrow morning. David's eyes lit up with the thrill of the hunt. I will have the entire team on it within 5 minutes. We will tear their financial history apart. I turned back to my monitors, my hands resting lightly on the keyboard. Marcus wanted a financial war. He wanted to use numbers to crush me. He had absolutely no idea that he had just challenged a master architect to a game of data analysis. I was going to dissect his entire life line by line, and I was going to enjoy every single second of it. David and my team were relentless, combing through years of publicly available data, SEC filings, and cross-referencing them against the Apex Fund's reported performance metrics. It was tedious, painstaking work, the kind of data analysis I excelled at. I didn't need a team of Wall Street insiders. I needed raw data and the algorithms I had spent years perfecting. By midnight, the picture was crystal clear. Marcus wasn't just cooking the books, he was running a sophisticated shell game. He had been quietly siphoning funds from lower-tier client accounts to prop up high-yield portfolios, creating a facade of consistent, impossible returns. When the market inevitably dipped, he used the new capital he attracted to cover the losses, a classic Ponzi scheme updated for the digital age. The sheer scale of the embezzlement was staggering, and the arrogance required to execute it was uniquely Marcus. He believed he was smarter than the regulators, smarter than his clients, and certainly smarter than his college dropout sister-in-law. But he had made one fatal error. In his desperation to cover his tracks and meet the demands of his increasingly suspicious clients, he had routed some of the siphoned funds through a subsidiary company that Richard had recently acquired. My father's real estate business wasn't just failing, it was actively laundering money for the Apex Fund. I stared at the data mapping on my screen, the complex web of financial transactions illuminating the true nature of my family's wealth. Their entire empire was built on fraud, deception, and the exploitation of others. The irony was almost too perfect. They had spent my entire life calling me the burden, the embarrassment, the failure. Yet beneath their polished exterior, they were nothing more than common criminals. I didn't confront them immediately. I didn't call Marcus to gloat or threaten him. I needed this to be a surgical strike, an undeniable exposure of their crimes that left them no room to maneuver, no opportunity to gaslight or manipulate the narrative. I needed legal firepower. The next morning, I contacted Vanguard's legal team, specifically Alexander Sterling. I explained the situation, detailing the extortion attempt and providing the initial findings of our data analysis. Sterling was silent for a long moment, processing the information. "This is highly irregular, Maya," he finally said, his tone grave. "Extortion is a serious federal offense, and the allegations against the Apex Fund, if true, could trigger a massive SEC investigation." "They are true," I assured him. "I have the data to prove it, but I need your guidance on how to proceed. I want to expose them, but I want to ensure my company and Vanguard are completely insulated from the fallout." Sterling agreed to assemble a team of specialized corporate litigators and forensic accountants. We would build an airtight case documenting every transaction, every falsified record, and every connection between Marcus's fund and Richard's real estate holdings. We would prepare a dossier so comprehensive that even the most expensive defense attorneys wouldn't be able to dismantle it. While the legal team mobilized, the smear campaign against me continued to rage online. Chloe and Marcus were relentlessly pushing the narrative of the stolen algorithm, flooding social media platforms with fabricated evidence and coordinated bot attacks. My inbox was overflowing with requests for comments from tech journalists eager to capitalize on the scandal. I maintained my silence, refusing to engage with the media or acknowledge the attacks. My silence, I knew, was driving them crazy. They expected me to panic, to lash out, to make a public mistake they could exploit. Instead, I remained completely unresponsive, a void they couldn't control or manipulate. 2 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. I let it ring, watching the screen until the call went to voicemail. A few minutes later, a text message arrived. "Maya, we need to talk. Your father and I are very concerned about the allegations circulating online. We want to help you manage this situation before it destroys your reputation completely. Let's meet for dinner tonight at Le Bernardin. Just the family. We can figure this out together." I read the message, a cold smile forming on my lips. They were getting desperate. The silence was working. They needed to gauge my reaction, to assess how much damage the smear campaign had caused, and to subtly pressure me into capitulating to Marcus's demands. They thought they were luring the vulnerable, easily manipulated scapegoat into a trap. I replied with a single word: "Okay." I spent the rest of the afternoon finalizing the dossier with Vanguard's legal team. We had compiled irrefutable evidence of the Apex Fund's embezzlement and the subsequent money laundering through Richard's company. We also had documented proof of the extortion attempt, including the recorded phone call from Marcus and the digital trace of the anonymous whistleblower complaints. The trap was set, but it wasn't the one my parents had planned. I was walking into the lion's den, not as the sacrificial lamb, but as the apex predator they never saw coming. That evening, I arrived at Le Bernardin exactly on time. I wore a tailored midnight blue suit, projecting an image of calm professional authority. The maitre d' escorted me to a private dining room at the back of the restaurant. As I entered, I took in the scene. My parents, Richard and Vivian, sat at the head of the table, their faces arranged in masks of forced concern. Chloe sat next to them, nervously checking her phone, while Marcus slouched in his chair, exuding arrogant confidence. But they weren't alone. Sitting opposite my family were two men I didn't recognize, both wearing sharp suits and carrying leather briefcases. One of them had a small, discreet recording device resting on the table in front of him. They looked like lawyers, perhaps even crisis management specialists. My parents had brought an audience. They intended to stage an intervention, a public shaming, designed to pressure me into compliance. They wanted witnesses to my supposed downfall to document my capitulation and ensure I couldn't back out of whatever deal they planned to force upon me. "Maya, darling," Vivian cooed, standing up to greet me, though she didn't attempt a hug this time. "We are so glad you came. We have been worried sick about you." "Have you?" I asked, taking the empty seat opposite Marcus. "Because judging by the smear campaign currently flooding the internet, you seem more interested in destroying me than helping me." Richard cleared his throat, adopting his most authoritative, patriarchal tone. "Now, Maya, let's not be dramatic. We are here to find a solution. The allegations against you are very serious, and they threaten not only your acquisition, but the reputation of this entire family." He gestured to the two men sitting across from them. "This is Mr. Vance and Mr. Miller from the firm of Vance and Associates. They are crisis management specialists. We have retained their services to help navigate this unfortunate situation." I looked at Vance and Miller, offering them a polite, detached nod. They were the muscle the hired guns brought in to intimidate me. "A solution," I repeated, my voice perfectly level. "And what solution do you propose, Richard?" Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, a smug smile playing on his lips. "It's simple, Maya. The negative press is causing Vanguard's shareholders to panic. They are preparing to freeze your assets pending a full investigation. You are about to lose everything." He paused, letting the threat sink in. "But I have connections. I can make the whistleblower complaints disappear. I can shut down the social media attacks. I can ensure the acquisition proceeds smoothly." "And in exchange?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "In exchange," Richard interjected smoothly, "you will sign over a portion of the Vanguard funds to a family trust managed by Marcus. $20 million. It's a small price to pay to secure your future and protect the family name." They had laid their cards on the table, completely unaware that I held the winning hand. They expected me to crumble, to cry, to beg for their help. They expected the dyslexic college dropout to fold under the pressure of their coordinated intimidation. I looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes in turn. I didn't see family. I saw parasites, desperate and hungry, clinging to the illusion of their own superiority. I let the silence stretch, savoring the absolute absurdity of their demands. They had perfectly orchestrated this dinner to break me. The luxurious walls of Le Bernardin felt like an interrogation chamber. Vivian leaned across the table, placing her manicured hand inches from mine. "Maya, please listen to reason," my mother said, her voice dripping with artificial empathy. "We know how much you struggle with stress. You have always been emotionally fragile. The pressure of running a multi-million-dollar enterprise is taking a toll on your mental health. Let Marcus shoulder this burden. He is a professional. We are only trying to protect you from yourself." "Protect me?" I repeated, keeping my tone neutral. "You mean protect me from the $56 million I earned by myself?" Richard slammed his hand flat against the table, rattling the crystal wine glasses. "Do not be insolent," he snapped, dropping the concerned father act. "This is about family blood. This is about survival. You owe us for raising you. We brought Mr. Vance and Mr. Miller here to ensure this transition is handled cleanly. If you refuse to sign that capital over to the family trust tonight, we cannot protect you from the media frenzy outside." I raised an eyebrow. "Outside?" Mr. Vance adjusted his tie and spoke up. "Yes, Miss Maya. There is a crowd of tech journalists and paparazzi currently waiting by the front entrance of the restaurant. They were tipped off about the corporate espionage allegations against you. If you sign this agreement tonight, our crisis management firm will issue a press release stating that the rumors are entirely false and that your family stands united behind you." If you do not sign, we will walk out that door and tell the press that your family is deeply concerned about your erratic behavior and history of mental instability. We will tell them you are unfit to manage your own assets. They were explicitly threatening to destroy my entire life on national television. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. They wanted to weaponize my past trauma and use my childhood dyslexia as proof of intellectual incompetence. Chloe chimed in, tossing her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder. Just sign the papers, Maya. It is for your own good. You dropped out of college because you could not even handle basic exams. How are you going to handle an SEC investigation? Let Marcus manage the money. He knows what he is doing. Marcus leaned back, swirling his expensive bourbon. It is a $20 million management fee, Maya. In the grand scheme of things, it is a bargain. I save your reputation, I save your Vanguard deal, and you get to keep the rest of your cash. Everyone wins. But if you walk out of here without signing, those reporters are going to eat you alive. Your name will be toxic in the medical tech industry forever. I looked down at the thick legal document Mr. Miller had slid across the table. It was a standard asset transfer agreement granting Marcus total discretionary control over $20 million of my Vanguard buyout. It was drafted perfectly designed to look like a voluntary family trust contribution rather than a forced extortion payment. They sat there staring at me with hungry, predatory eyes. They expected me to panic. They expected the years of emotional conditioning to kick in. They wanted the scared, dyslexic scapegoat to surrender to the overwhelming pressure of her sophisticated family members. I knew exactly what I had to do. I had to make them believe their gaslighting was actually working. I had to feed their massive egos until they were blind to the trap I was setting right under their noses. I let my shoulders slump slightly. I lowered my gaze to the table, adopting the posture of a defeated woman. I allowed my breathing to become a little shallow, mimicking the early stages of a panic attack. Are the reporters really out there? I asked, forcing my voice to tremble just a fraction. Vivian immediately seized the opportunity. Yes, sweetheart, she cooed, reaching out to pat my arm. They are like sharks. They want to tear you down. But we will not let them. Just sign the trust over to Marcus and your father will go out there and tell them how proud we are of you. You just have to trust your family. I looked up at Marcus. He was practically vibrating with greed. If I do this, I said, my voice quiet and hesitant. If I agree to transfer $20 million into your management fund, I need to know the money is secure. I need to know you are not going to lose it in risky trades. Marcus laughed, a loud, booming sound of pure arrogance. Maya, I manage billions. My fund has outperformed the market for 3 consecutive years. Your $20 million is pocket change to me. It will be safer with me than it ever was in your hands. I picked up the expensive pen resting beside the contract. I rolled it between my fingers, staring at the signature line. Then I set the pen down. I am not saying no, I told them, watching the immediate flash of anger cross Richard's face. I am saying I am a data architect. I do not sign anything without running a basic risk assessment. It is how my brain works. If you want me to voluntarily transfer $20 million into the Apex Fund tomorrow morning, I need to see your internal financial portfolios tonight. Marcus frowned, his ego bristling at the challenge. You want to see my financials? You would not even understand the terminology on the reports. Maybe not, I conceded, keeping my tone perfectly submissive. But $20 million is a lot of money to me, Marcus. I just need to see the quarterly returns and the asset allocation reports for your primary portfolios. Just to give me peace of mind. Give me the raw data. Once I see the numbers match your claims, I will sign this paper right here. Richard slammed his fist on the table again. This is outrageous. You do not question your brother-in-law professional integrity. Wait, Richard, Marcus interrupted, holding up a hand. His ego was too massive to refuse a direct challenge from someone he considered intellectually inferior. If the little high school dropout wants to look at some spreadsheets to feel better about herself, I will humor her. It changes nothing. Marcus pulled a sleek silver laptop from his briefcase and powered it on. He was so incredibly eager to prove his superiority, so desperate to get his hands on my $20 million, that he was abandoning all basic corporate security protocols. He thought I was just a frightened woman stalling for time. He had absolutely no idea that he was about to hand a master hacker the exact administrative access she needed to completely destroy his life. I will generate a secure link to my executive read-only dashboard, Marcus said, typing rapidly on his keyboard. You can look at all the charts and graphs you want, Maya. You have exactly 30 minutes to review the data before I walk out that door and feed you to the press. I pulled my own ultra-thin tablet from my purse and connected to the restaurant private secure network. My heart was beating with a slow, powerful rhythm. The predator had just handed me the keys to his cage. Send the link, I said quietly. Marcus tapped a single key on his silver laptop. A soft chime echoed from my tablet as the encrypted email arrived. I opened the message and clicked the secure URL. A sophisticated dashboard materialized on my screen, displaying the Apex Fund logo in sharp metallic font. Various bar graphs and pie charts populated the interface, glowing in neon green and red. To an untrained eye, it looked like a highly successful Wall Street portfolio. To me, it looked like a flimsy digital curtain trying to hide a massive gaping hole. I squinted at the screen, deliberately furrowing my brow. I tilted my head slightly, mimicking the posture of someone completely overwhelmed by complex information. I let out a soft, frustrated sigh, rubbing my temples to really sell the performance. Is this the main ledger? I asked, tracing my finger aimlessly across the glass surface. There are so many acronyms here, Marcus. What does EBD even mean in this context? Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, chuckling deeply. He exchanged a knowing, incredibly smug glance with Chloe. It means you are out of your depth, Maya, he said, his voice dripping with condescending patience. It stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation and amortization. It is standard finance vocabulary. Do not hurt your brain trying to decode the adult math. Just look at the bottom line. The fund is up 14% this quarter. That is all you need to know. Vivian reached across the table and tapped her manicured fingernail against the edge of my tablet. See, sweetheart, she cooed, her tone sickly sweet. Marcus is a professional. You do not need to understand the mechanics of the engine, just let him drive the car. We have Mr. Vance and Mr. Miller waiting to draft the final press release. The reporters are getting restless outside. Let us wrap this up quickly before they start writing their own stories. I need to look at the asset allocation tab, I mumbled, keeping my eyes glued to the screen. I dragged my finger across the display, navigating away from the visual graphs and diving straight into the raw data feeds. Chloe groaned loudly, throwing her hands up in the air. Oh my God, Maya, just stop. We all know it takes you 10 minutes to read a simple restaurant menu. Are we really going to sit here while you pretend to analyze Wall Street financials? You are embarrassing yourself. Sign the $20 million transfer and let us go home. I have a spa appointment tomorrow morning and I am exhausted from dealing with your drama. Let her read, Richard snapped, gripping his wine glass tightly. Let her see that this family knows how to generate real wealth without needing to beg corporations for a buyout. While they bickered and mocked my reading comprehension, my fingers were flying across the digital keyboard at the bottom of my screen. Marcus had granted me a read-only guest token, but his arrogance was his downfall. He had failed to properly segment his server architecture. He had linked his executive dashboard directly to the primary cloud database of his entire investment firm. By giving me the secure URL, he had unwittingly handed me the backdoor access point to his complete operational ledger. I opened a hidden terminal window on my tablet. I quickly wrote a proprietary scraping script, utilizing the same predictive data modeling techniques Vanguard Medical had just purchased for $56 million. Instead of scanning patient vitals for signs of organ failure, my algorithm was now scanning Marcus' financial data for signs of corporate fraud. I need to check the risk distribution on these real estate holdings, I said aloud, injecting a tremor of anxiety into my voice. It looks like a lot of capital is tied up in commercial properties downtown. Is that normal for a diversified portfolio? Marcus scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. Commercial real estate is the bedrock of generational wealth, Maya. You would know that if you had stayed in school. Those properties are solid gold. I hit execute on my scraping script. The raw data began pouring into my encrypted offshore servers at blinding speed. The algorithm immediately flagged massive discrepancies. Marcus was not just shifting money around to balance ledgers. He was actively creating phantom shell companies to hide catastrophic market losses. And right there, buried under layers of fake corporate identities, was the undeniable link. Millions of dollars from the Apex Fund had been illegally funneled directly into Richard's failing real estate development firm. My father and my brother-in-law were co-conspirators in a massive federal crime. They were using investor capital to bail out Richard's bad mortgages, and Richard was providing Marcus with fake property valuations to inflate the Apex Fund quarterly reports. It was a beautiful, flawlessly documented cycle of felony embezzlement. I kept my face perfectly slack. I bit my lower lip, acting as though I was struggling to understand the massive numbers. Wow, I whispered, feigning awe. These are very large numbers, Marcus. You manage all of this by yourself. It seems incredibly complicated. Marcus puffed out his chest, adjusting his silk tie. I manage a highly elite team of analysts, Maya. But yes, I am the principal architect of the fund. Every major financial decision runs exclusively through me. I built this portfolio from the ground up. No one touches the primary capital without my direct authorization. He had just publicly claimed sole responsibility for the entire fraudulent enterprise, in a room with two crisis management lawyers sitting right across from him. I almost smiled. I could not have planned a better confession if I tried. I just need 2 more minutes, I said, tapping the screen frantically. The data transfer was 90% complete. I want to make sure I am doing the right thing for the family. Richard slammed his palm on the table, causing the expensive silverware to rattle. You have had enough time, Maya. The reporters are waiting. Sign the transfer agreement now, or Mr. Vance walks out that front door and destroys your medical acquisition. We are not playing games anymore. Vivian nodded vigorously, her eyes wide and manic. Do it, Maya. Do it for blood. Do it for the family legacy. If you do not sign that paper right now, you are dead to us forever. You will be nothing but a disgrace. The transfer hit 100%. A tiny green check mark flashed in the corner of my tablet screen. I had everything. The bank routing numbers, the fake shell company registrations, the falsified tax returns, and the digital signatures of both Marcus and Richard linking them to the crimes. I quickly forwarded the entire encrypted data packet directly to David at my agency headquarters and CC'd Alexander Sterling at Vanguard Medical. I closed the terminal window and minimized the banking dashboard, returning the screen to its harmless visual graphs. I picked up the heavy gold pen from the table and held it over the $20 million transfer agreement Mr. Miller had provided. Marcus leaned forward, a triumphant, predatory grin spreading across his face. That is it, Maya, he coaxed, his voice practically purring with greed. Just sign on the dotted line. Welcome to the big leagues. Chloe rolled her eyes, letting out a loud sigh of relief. Finally, she muttered, crossing her arms. Now we can actually enjoy this dinner. I looked down at the signature line. I pressed the tip of the pen against the thick parchment paper. I let the silence build in the private dining room, allowing them to taste their impending victory. They thought they had broken me. They thought they had successfully extorted the dyslexic scapegoat. They thought their criminal empire was perfectly safe. I lowered the gold pen until its tip rested a millimeter above the signature line. The quiet hum of the luxury restaurant faded, leaving only the sound of my family's shallow, eager breathing. Marcus leaned closer, his dark eyes fixed greedily on the document. I smiled. Then I released my grip, letting the pen clatter loudly onto the mahogany table. It rolled off the contract, hitting Marcus' empty wine glass with a sharp, ringing ping. I am not signing this, I announced, my voice echoing perfectly in the private dining room. The collective gasp from my toxic family was immediate. Richard slammed both hands onto the table, half rising from his chair in sudden, blind fury. Are you out of your mind? Richard roared, his face turning crimson red. We are giving you a lifeline. Sign the paper right now, Maya. Vivian grabbed my arm, her manicured fingers digging fiercely into my skin to force compliance. Do not do this, you stupid girl, she hissed, her maternal facade vanishing instantly. Do you want to be completely destroyed? Marcus let out a cruel laugh, shaking his head in absolute disbelief at my stupidity. You really are mentally deficient, he sneered, aggressively reaching for his briefcase. Fine, have it your own way. We gave you a generous chance to survive this storm. Mr. Vance, Mr. Miller, go right ahead. Tell the eager journalists outside that the Vanguard acquisition is a complete sham built on stolen tech algorithms. The two high-priced crisis management lawyers stood up simultaneously, hastily buttoning their tailored dark suits. They moved toward the door, ready to execute the vicious media smear campaign. I did not move an inch. I just tapped the glowing screen of my tablet. Gentlemen, before you walk out that door to speak to the press, I highly recommend you look at the digital files I just forwarded to your firm public email address, I said, my tone strictly commanding. Mr. Vance paused, his hand resting heavily on the brass door handle. He exchanged a confused glance with Mr. Miller before hastily pulling out his smartphone. I would hate for your reputable crisis management firm to be heavily implicated in federal racketeering and massive wire fraud, I added, casually leaning back in my comfortable chair. That tends to ruin a legal career overnight. Marcus froze instantly. His hand halted halfway inside his open briefcase. What are you talking about? Marcus demanded, his voice losing its arrogant edge. What exactly did you send them? I looked directly into his eyes, stripping away the frightened victim persona I had worn all evening long. I sent them the raw, unedited financial data, Marcus, I replied smoothly. The precise data you just voluntarily handed me when you logged into your executive dashboard on an unsecured public network. Did you honestly think a data architect was just looking at pretty colorful pie charts? You gave me direct backdoor access to your highly confidential operational ledger. Marcus' face completely drained of all its color. His dark skin went ashen gray as the horrifying realization finally struck him. He lunged across the wide table, trying to grab my tablet, but I smoothly slid it out of his desperate reach. You are bluffing, he stammered, his broad chest heaving as sheer, unadulterated panic rapidly set in. You cannot simply bypass our internal banking security protocols. I bypassed them in less than 3 minutes, I corrected him, flashing a sharp grin. And what I found hidden in your servers was absolutely fascinating. I turned my attention to my father, who was now sweating profusely. I found out exactly how you two are funding this lavish fake lifestyle. Marcus, you have been actively siphoning millions from your lower-tier client portfolios to cover massive internal market losses. And Richard, you have been laundering that stolen capital through your failing commercial real estate developments using a complex network of anonymous shell companies registered in Delaware. I listed the exact banking routing numbers and the fake corporate identities. I recited the precise dates of the illegal offshore wire transfers. With every specific data point I dropped, the atmosphere in the private room grew noticeably colder. Richard collapsed heavily back into his chair, clutching his chest as if he had been shot. Chloe looked back and forth between her devastated father and her panicking husband, her Harvard-educated brain finally processing the immense magnitude of the situation. Marcus, tell me she is lying, Chloe pleaded forcefully, grabbing her husband's arm to shake him. Tell me you did not really steal our client money. Marcus could not even answer her. He was staring blindly at my tablet, his mouth opening and closing in silent, suffocating horror. The arrogant Wall Street titan had been completely dismantled by the dyslexic dropout he had always openly despised. Mr. Vance cleared his throat extremely loudly. He was staring at his smartphone screen, his face a rigid mask of absolute terror. He had just finished reading the terrifying summary of the data packet I sent. Mr. Miller physically recoiled from the glowing screen in disgust. Richard, Mr. Vance said, his voice trembling slightly with suppressed fear. We were officially retained to manage a public relations crisis regarding your daughter's social media rumors. We were absolutely not informed that your family is actively engaged in an ongoing corporate embezzlement scheme. Vivian let out a shrill, desperate crying wail. Do not listen to her, please. She is trying to unfairly frame us. We will gladly pay you double your retainer fee today. Just go talk to the eager press outside." Mr. Miller aggressively shoved his expensive phone back into his suit pocket. "Keep your dirty money, Vivian," he snapped fiercely. "Our prestigious firm has zero interest in becoming willing accessories to major federal financial crimes. We are terminating our legal representation effective immediately. Do not ever contact our corporate offices again." The trap had closed flawlessly without a single issue. The end was finally here. 2 weeks later, the crisp morning air of downtown Manhattan felt absolutely electric. The towering glass and steel skyscraper of Vanguard Medical Enterprises pierced the sky, representing the absolute pinnacle of corporate healthcare power on the East Coast. Today was supposed to be the ultimate triumph for the Golden Child. Despite the catastrophic meltdown at Le Bernardin, my sister and her husband had managed to convince themselves that my data breach was a localized issue. They desperately believed that Richard could somehow cover the missing millions before the federal regulators noticed. More importantly, they believed their shiny new executive appointments at Vanguard would provide the massive salaries and corporate shielding they needed to survive the incoming storm. Chloe strutted through the expansive marble lobby of the Vanguard headquarters, looking like she owned the entire building. She wore a tailored white Chanel power suit, her Harvard-class ring catching the bright overhead lights. Marcus walked right beside her, matching her arrogant stride, in a bespoke navy pinstripe suit. He carried a sleek leather briefcase likely filled with the falsified portfolios he planned to use to impress his new colleagues. They bypassed the standard security desk, flashing their temporary executive badges at the intimidated junior staff with blatant condescension. "Can you believe the receptionist asked me to sign in?" Chloe scoffed, pressing the button for the private executive elevator. "I am the new director of strategic innovation. My Harvard credentials alone secured this position. They should have rolled out a literal red carpet for me." Marcus adjusted his expensive silk tie, checking his reflection in the mirrored elevator doors. "Do not let the lower-level employees annoy you, Chloe," he said, his voice dripping with his usual unwarranted confidence. "We are entering the highest tier of medical finance today. As the newly appointed senior financial consultant for their acquisition branch, I will be managing billions in liquid assets. This Vanguard contract is our golden ticket out of your father-messy real estate problems. Once I integrate my Apex fund strategies with their corporate accounts, we will be entirely untouchable." They stepped into the glass elevator ascending rapidly toward the 50th floor. They were completely blinded by their own monumental egos. They honestly thought their prestigious degrees and country club networking had magically landed them these elite roles. They had no idea that I had personally engineered their hiring process. Alexander Sterling and I had crafted the perfect corporate bait, knowing their insatiable greed would compel them to accept the high-paying positions without reading the fine print of their employment contracts. They were walking blindly into the ultimate slaughterhouse. I can barely wait to see the look on Maya's face when she realizes we work for the very company that bought her little algorithm. Chloe laughed, her voice echoing in the confined space. "She probably thinks she won because of that stupid dinner stunt. But we are the ones sitting on the executive board now. We can easily vote to bury her software in administrative red tape until she begs us for mercy." She really thought a high school dropout could outsmart a Harvard graduate and a Wall Street director. It is genuinely pathetic. Marcus nodded, a vicious smirk spreading across his face. "She is a total amateur, Chloe. She played her only card at that restaurant. Now we have institutional power. I will ensure her $56 million is locked in compliance audits for the next decade." The elevator chimed softly, announcing their arrival at the top floor. The heavy steel doors slid open, revealing a massive reception area decorated in minimalist modern art and polished chrome. An executive assistant politely directed them toward the primary boardroom at the end of the long hallway. Chloe and Marcus walked shoulder to shoulder, projecting an aura of absolute invincibility. They reached the towering double mahogany doors of the main conference room and pushed them open without bothering to knock. The Vanguard boardroom was an intimidating display of immense corporate wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city skyline. A massive polished obsidian table dominated the center of the room. Seated around the table were 12 of the most powerful medical executives and financial directors on the entire East Coast. Alexander Sterling sat near the front, meticulously reviewing a stack of legal documents. Chloe stepped into the room, flashing her most practiced, charismatic smile. "Good morning, everyone," she announced, projecting her voice to ensure all eyes were on her. "I am Chloe, the new Director of Strategic Innovation, and this is my husband, Marcus, your new Senior Financial Consultant. We are absolutely thrilled to bring our top-tier expertise to Vanguard." The 12 executives did not smile back. They did not stand up to greet them. They simply sat in total absolute silence, staring at the arrogant couple with completely unreadable expressions. The heavy quiet stretched on, making the air in the room feel incredibly dense and suffocating. Marcus cleared his throat, trying to fill the uncomfortable void. He stepped forward, placing his leather briefcase firmly on the polished obsidian table. "It is a genuine honor to join this prestigious board," Marcus stated, smoothing his tie. "I have already drafted several aggressive wealth maximization strategies that will streamline Vanguard recent acquisitions. I am ready to present my financial roadmaps to the chairwoman immediately." Alexander Sterling slowly closed his legal folder. He looked up at Marcus, adjusting his silver glasses. "That is highly proactive of you, Marcus," Sterling said, his voice echoing in the massive room. "However, the chairwoman does not usually review financial roadmaps from lower-level consultants. But since you are so eager to present your strategies, I am sure she will make an exception for you today." Sterling gestured respectfully toward the head of the long table. The massive, high-backed leather chair was turned away from the door, facing the expansive windows overlooking the city. "Madam Chairwoman Sterling," announced his tone, ringing with absolute deference. "The new hires have arrived for their final orientation." Chloe and Marcus stood at attention, eager to impress the mysterious billionaire leading the conglomerate. They waited for the powerful executive to welcome them into the fold. I watched the reflection of the city skyline in the glass window, letting the profound silence break their fragile nerves. I placed my coffee cup down on the small side table. The ceramic clink sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. I grasped the armrests of the heavy leather chair and slowly, smoothly spun it around to face the center of the boardroom. I crossed my legs, leaning back comfortably under the bright overhead lights. I looked directly into the utterly horrified faces of my sister and my brother-in-law. The blood instantly drained from Chloe's face, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. Marcus gripped the edge of the obsidian table so hard his knuckles turned completely white. They were trapped in a glass cage suspended 50 stories in the air, surrounded by the most powerful executives in the city, who were all loyal exclusively to me. "Good morning, employees," I said, offering them a cold, razor-sharp smile. "Welcome to my company." Chloe stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the thick carpet. Her mouth opened and closed silently, resembling a fish pulled from the water. Marcus simply stared at me, his arrogant facade cracking into a mask of pure, unfiltered panic. He looked frantically at the 12 powerful executives seated around the massive obsidian table, expecting one of them to call security and remove the crazed imposter sitting in the command chair. Nobody moved. The executives merely watched the two new hires completely implode. "This is a joke," Chloe finally shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. "You broke into this building. You bribed a receptionist. Alexander, call security right now. This high school dropout is trespassing in a restricted corporate area." Alexander Sterling did not flinch at my sister's hysterical outburst. He calmly adjusted his silver tie and looked at her with clinical detachment. "Security is only for unauthorized personnel," Sterling stated, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Madam Chairwoman Maya is the majority shareholder of the Vanguard Predictive Data subsidiary. As part of our $56 million acquisition agreement, she was granted full executive oversight of all technological and financial integrations. She is your direct superior, Chloe." Marcus shook his head violently, refusing to accept the reality unfolding in front of him. He slammed his hands onto the polished table, desperately trying to reclaim his Wall Street dominance. "This is highly illegal," Marcus barked, his voice vibrating with desperation. You cannot acquire a massive corporate entity and place an uneducated waitress at the helm. I am a senior financial consultant. I manage billions in liquid assets. I will not report to a dyslexic fraud who tricked Vanguard into buying stolen algorithms. I am taking my financial roadmaps directly to the board of directors. You are taking absolutely nothing anywhere, Marcus, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. I pushed a thick black folder across the smooth surface of the obsidian table. It stopped precisely an inch from his white knuckles. But since you brought up your financial roadmaps, I decided to do a little preliminary auditing on your Apex Fund portfolios. Marcus stared at the black folder as if it were a live explosive. The blood completely drained from his face. His arrogant posture collapsed. I opened my sleek tablet, projecting my screen directly onto the massive digital display mounted on the boardroom wall. The bright neon charts and complex data models illuminated the darkened room. The 12 executives turned their attention to the screen, their expressions hardening into masks of professional disgust. You see, Marcus? I continued, standing up from the leather chair to pace slowly around the table. You made a fatal miscalculation at Le Bernardin. You assumed my dyslexia made me stupid. You assumed I was just staring blankly at your pretty pie charts. But while you were busy mocking my intelligence and demanding $20 million in extortion money, I was actively scraping your entire operational ledger. You handed a master data architect the direct backdoor keys to your highly confidential servers. I tapped the screen, bringing up a staggering sequence of unauthorized wire transfers. Let us review your brilliant wealth maximization strategies, I announced, addressing the entire board. Marcus has been running a highly sophisticated Ponzi scheme. He systematically siphoned over $30 million from lower-tier client accounts to cover catastrophic market losses in his high-yield portfolios. When the deficits grew too large, he began laundering the stolen capital through commercial real estate developments owned by my father, Richard. Chloe let out a strangled gasp, covering her mouth with both trembling hands. Marcus staggered backward, bumping into the heavy mahogany doors. That is fabricated data, Marcus stammered, sweat pouring down his forehead. She hacked my computer and planted fake routing numbers to frame me. This is a malicious corporate smear campaign. I tapped the screen again, pulling up the exact digital signatures and encrypted timestamps. Data never lies, Marcus, I said coldly. And neither do the anonymous whistleblower complaints you filed against me using your own Apex Fund servers. You tried to tank my Vanguard acquisition to force me into paying your extortion fee. You thought you could bleed me dry to save your bankrupt father-in-law. But you left a digital trail so wide a blind person could follow it. Alexander Sterling stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. His gaze was merciless. Vanguard Medical Enterprises maintains a zero-tolerance policy for financial fraud, Sterling declared, his voice echoing with finality. We conducted a secondary forensic audit based on the data Madam Chairwoman provided. The evidence of your massive embezzlement is irrefutable. You utilized Vanguard corporate networks this morning when you swiped your temporary executive badges, essentially committing wire fraud on our premises. Marcus looked around the room like a trapped animal. The 12 executives glared at him with absolute contempt. He had walked into the ultimate corporate slaughterhouse completely blind. You are officially terminated effective immediately, I stated, locking eyes with my terrified brother-in-law. Both of you are fired. Chloe, your Harvard degree cannot save you from being an accessory to federal racketeering. Your brief employment at Vanguard Medical is permanently over. Chloe burst into loud, hysterical tears, grabbing Marcus' arm. Tell them it is not true, Marcus, she sobbed violently. Tell them you did not steal that money. Tell them we are not going to jail. Marcus could not speak. He was hyperventilating, his eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. The arrogant finance bro was completely broken. Sterling pressed a silver button on the conference table. The heavy mahogany doors swung open instantly. 4 armed corporate security guards stepped into the boardroom, flanking the terrified couple. Mr. Sterling will escort you to the lobby, I said, turning my back on them, to look out the floor-to-ceiling windows. Federal agents are currently waiting for you by the front reception desk. Get them out of here. While my sister and her husband were being unceremoniously escorted out of the Vanguard Medical Headquarters by armed security guards, another completely devastating crisis was unfolding exactly 300 miles away. The $16 million Connecticut estate, the very same mansion my father Richard had proudly gifted to Chloe during her graduation party, was currently surrounded by a fleet of black sedans and moving trucks. The massive iron gates had been forced open, and official foreclosure notices were being aggressively taped to the towering front pillars. Inside the opulent mansion, my parents were experiencing the absolute collapse of their carefully constructed fraudulent empire. Richard sat frozen in his leather armchair in his private study, staring blindly at the stack of legal documents resting on his mahogany desk. The papers had been delivered by a federal process server less than an hour ago. The bold red stamps reading "Seizure of Assets" and "Notice of Default" seemed to blur in front of his eyes. His breathing was shallow and ragged, his face a sickening shade of gray. The powerful patriarch who had spent 34 years demanding perfection and absolute compliance from his family was now completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his own catastrophic failures. Vivian paced frantically back and forth across the expensive Persian rug, clutching her silk robe tightly around her trembling frame. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, her manicured nails digging deep into the soft fabric. She kept glancing out the large bay windows, watching the liquidation team systematically cataloging their luxury vehicles parked in the circular driveway. "This has to be a mistake!" Vivian shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. "Richard, do something. Call your lawyers. Call the bank president. You play golf with him every single Sunday. Tell them they cannot just show up here and take our home. We are the most prominent family in this neighborhood. We are hosting a charity gala next month. We cannot be evicted." Richard did not answer. He slowly picked up the foreclosure notice, his hands shaking so violently the thick paper rattled. "It is not a mistake, Vivian," he whispered, his voice sounding hollow and completely defeated. "It is over. Everything is gone." "What do you mean it is over?" Vivian demanded, stopping her frantic pacing to glare at her husband. "You told me the business was fine. You said Marcus was handling the cash flow issues. You just gave this house to Chloe. You stood in front of 200 people and told them our legacy was perfectly secure. How can we suddenly be bankrupt in a single morning?" Richard let out a harsh, bitter laugh, dropping the papers back onto the desk. He ran a trembling hand through his thinning hair, finally forced to confront the lies he had been spinning for years. "I lied, Vivian." Richard confessed, his voice cracking under the immense weight of his own profound humiliation. "The real estate firm has been completely underwater for over 18 months. Every single commercial development project I launched in the past 2 years failed spectacularly. We were bleeding millions of dollars every single week. I had to take out a second and third mortgage on this estate just to keep the lights on and pay for Chloe's extravagant lifestyle. I was using one credit line to pay off another, hoping the market would magically recover." Vivian gasped, taking a stumbling step backward as the horrific reality began to sink in. She grabbed the edge of a marble side table to steady herself. "And Marcus?" she asked, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "You told me Marcus was covering the deficit. You said his investment fund was injecting capital into your projects." "He was," Richard admitted, closing his eyes as a wave of nausea washed over him. "He was funneling money from his client portfolios directly into my shell companies to keep my firm afloat. We were desperately trying to balance the books before the regulators noticed the massive shortfall. But Maya found out. She hacked his servers during that dinner at Le Bernardin. She dumped our entire fraudulent ledger directly to the federal authorities." Vivian let out a shrill, desperate wail, pressing her hands against the side of her head. She refused to accept the terrifying truth tumbling from her husband's lips. She could not comprehend that the daughter she had so relentlessly abused was the sole architect of their total destruction. "No," Vivian sobbed aggressively, shaking her head. "No, that dyslexic failure could not possibly understand complex financial data. She dropped out of high school. She is a waitress. She is stupid. She is the dumb one. Marcus must have made a mistake. It has to be Marcus' fault. He is the finance director. He was supposed to protect us. Richard slammed his fist weakly against the desk. It does not matter whose fault it is, Vivian. The FBI raided Marcus' office this morning. The regulatory agencies froze every single asset tied to the Apex Fund. And because my real estate firm was receiving the stolen money, the banks immediately called in all my outstanding debts. We have absolutely zero liquidity. We cannot even afford to hire a defense attorney right now. We are completely ruined. As if to punctuate his devastating statement, a loud, sharp knock echoed from the heavy wooden doors of the study. Before Richard could even respond, the doors swung open, revealing a team of men wearing dark suits and serious expressions. They were flanked by two armed security contractors. Mr. and Mrs. Richard, the lead agent, announced, stepping into the room with a clipboard in his hand. We are the asset liquidation team representing the primary lien holder of this property. Your grace period has officially expired. You are formally required to vacate these premises immediately. Vivian let out another shrill scream, rushing forward to physically block the agent path. You cannot do this, she shrieked, her voice echoing through the massive house. This is my home. You cannot just throw us out into the street like common criminals. I demand to speak to whoever is in charge of this liquidation. Who bought our debt? Who authorized this hostile takeover? I want a name right now. The lead agent simply adjusted his glasses, remaining perfectly calm in the face of her hysterical outburst. He flipped to the second page on his clipboard, verifying the legal information. Your outstanding commercial and residential debts were bundled and sold in a private auction early yesterday morning, the agent stated, his voice flat and professional. The new primary lien holder and current legal owner of this entire estate is a private asset management firm wholly owned by Madame Maya. The absolute silence that fell over the study was deafening. The words hung in the air, wrapping around my parents' throats like a tightening noose. Vivian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes rolled back slightly, and she collapsed heavily into a nearby chair, completely overcome by the sheer, impossible magnitude of the situation. Richard simply stared at the agent, his face devoid of all blood, looking like a man who had just received a terminal diagnosis. They had spent 34 years convincing themselves that I was nothing. They had built their entire identities on the belief that I was inferior, defective, and entirely disposable. They had used my supposed stupidity to justify their own immense cruelty. Now they were sitting in a seized mansion, completely bankrupt, facing imminent federal charges, and realizing that the daughter they had discarded was the one holding the deed to their entire miserable lives. The ultimate karmic justice had arrived, and it was utterly inescapable. The heavy oak doors of the massive suburban mansion swung completely open, revealing the grand entrance. I stepped over the threshold, not as a banished daughter, but as the absolute legal owner of the entire property. The pristine marble foyer echoed loudly with the sharp, rhythmic click of my designer heels. Two senior asset managers and a heavily armed private security team walked closely behind me. I wore a tailored crimson suit projecting absolute authority. This was the same foyer where Vivian had screamed at me to pack my bags 5 years ago. Today, the power dynamic was permanently inverted. I bypassed the grand staircase and walked directly toward Richard's private study. The heavy double doors were already ajar. I pushed them open fully, stepping into the room. Vivian wept hysterically into her trembling hands, while Richard stared blankly at the multiple foreclosure notices. They both looked up as I entered. Seeing me standing there as the sole architect of their total destruction physically paralyzed them both. Hello, Richard, I said, my voice slicing cleanly through the heavy, suffocating silence of the dark room. I hear you are having some severe liquidity issues today. Vivian scrambled to her feet, attempting desperate maternal manipulation. Maya, she sobbed, rushing forward blindly with her arms wide outstretched. Oh, Maya, thank God you are here. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. The liquidation agent just said you own our massive debt. You bought the debt to save us right now. You are here to rescue the entire family estate. I quickly raised a hand, halting her advance, while my security formed a solid physical barrier. Vivian recoiled backward, her eyes darting nervously to the armed men. "I did not buy your debt to save you, Vivian," I stated very coldly. "I bought it simply because acquiring prime real estate at a catastrophic discount is highly profitable." Richard over-leveraged this property so aggressively that the bank practically handed me the deed just to clear their own massive liabilities. "I am not standing here as your daughter. I am standing here as your new landlord." Richard slammed his fist weakly against his heavy desk, trying to summon his completely lost patriarchal authority. "You cannot do this, Maya." Richard barked, his voice violently cracking with panic. "You cannot legally evict your own parents from their home. This is the grand family estate. This is the house where you grew up. We raised you safely here. You owe us absolute respect." I looked deeply down at the broken man who spent my life calling me stupid. "I do not owe you anything, Richard," I replied, my tone remaining completely devoid of emotion. "You lost the right to call this the family estate the moment you secretly mortgaged it to fund Chloe's lavish designer lifestyle. You gambled this entire house away to pay for luxury cars you could no longer afford. You built a fragile house of cards on financial fraud, and now it has finally collapsed." I picked up the foreclosure notice. "I purchased the primary lien yesterday afternoon. The transaction is fully cleared and legally binding, which means you are currently trespassing on my private property." Vivian let out a shrill, terrified wail. "You are a monster," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You are a cold-blooded monster. We are your blood. We fed you. We clothed you. How can you throw your own mother out into the street?" I looked directly into her frantic eyes. "You threw me out when I was 22. Vivian," I reminded her, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You gave me 1 week to pack because my learning disability embarrassed you. You told me I would die penniless in a gutter. You watched me walk out with nothing, and you laughed. Do not stand there and lecture me about family blood when you were the one who poisoned the well." I signaled my asset managers. They dropped stacks of flattened cardboard moving boxes onto the Persian rug with a heavy thud. "Here is the reality," I announced. "You have exactly 2 hours to pack your personal belongings. You may take your clothing, your basic toiletries, and any personal photographs. Everything else remains in this house. It is all collateral against the massive debt you owe my firm. My liquidation team will supervise your packing to ensure you do not steal anything that belongs to me." 2 hours, Richard gasped. "That is impossible. We lived here for 20 years. We cannot pack our lives into cardboard boxes in 2 hours. Where are we supposed to go? We have no money. Our accounts are completely frozen. I suggest you call Chloe," I replied, offering him a sharp, unsympathetic smile. "She was supposed to be the brilliant future of this family. Let the Harvard graduate figure out how to house her bankrupt parents. Maybe Marcus can find you a cheap motel room." Vivian dropped to her knees, sobbing hysterically. "Please, Maya, I am begging you," Vivian wailed. "I will do anything. I will apologize publicly. I will tell everyone how smart you are. Just let us stay in the guest house. We have nowhere else to go." I looked at the woman who tormented me. I felt absolutely no pity. "Apologies require a conscience, Vivian. You only have regrets because you got caught. Your time is up." "It is exactly 2 o'clock," I stated. "You have until 4 o'clock to vacate. At 4 o'clock 1, my security team will physically remove you and change the locks. The clock is ticking. I suggest you start packing." I turned my back on them and walked out of the study. Behind me, I heard my parents frantically scrambling to assemble cardboard boxes, desperately stuffing designer clothes into them. I walked through my new mansion, watching the liquidation team tag the expensive artwork. The toxic empire my family built to oppress me was now officially my property. I had taken everything permanently and ruthlessly. At exactly 4, the heavy grandfather clock standing in the main hallway chimed loudly. The resonant sound signaled the absolute end of Richard and Vivian. My private security team stepped forward, moving with practiced military precision. The lead contractor simply pointed toward the front entrance. My parents dragged their hastily packed cardboard boxes across the polished marble floor. The cheap brown cardboard scraped against the pristine stone, leaving faint, dusty trails. Richard struggled to lift a box filled with his tailored suits. His face was a map of deep purple veins and sweat. Vivian carried 2 oversized garbage bags, stuffed randomly with her expensive shoes and whatever cosmetics she could grab. She sobbed loudly with every single step, her mascara running in dark, muddy rivers down her cheeks. They looked nothing like the elite socialites who had hosted a massive graduation party just 2 weeks ago. They looked like common vagrants. I stood on the grand staircase looking down at them from the landing. I watched them pass through the massive double doors they used to lock me behind. The security team followed them out onto the expansive front porch and firmly pulled the mahogany doors shut. The heavy metallic click of the deadbolt locking into place echoed sharply. I walked down the stairs, crossing the foyer, and opened the side security door. I stepped outside onto the stone portico, watching them navigate the long, winding driveway. It was a quarter-mile walk to the main road. They had to drag their pathetic cardboard boxes and plastic garbage bags every single inch of the way. Richard had to stop twice to catch his breath, clutching his chest. Vivian stumbled in her designer heels, snapping one of the stilettos in half. She kicked the broken shoe into the manicured bushes and continued walking barefoot on the rough asphalt. I strolled casually down the parallel garden path, keeping pace with them from behind the safety of the tall, sculpted hedges. I wanted to witness the exact moment they crossed the property line. I wanted to see them standing on the public curb, completely stripped of their stolen wealth. When they finally reached the towering iron gates, the security guards pressed a button. The gates slowly swung outward, groaning slightly on their massive hinges. Richard and Vivian stepped onto the municipal sidewalk. The guards immediately pulled the gates shut behind them, engaging the electronic locking mechanism. I stepped out from behind the hedges and walked directly to the iron barrier. My parents stood on the public curb, surrounded by their miserable pile of belongings. Several cars drove past, slowing down as neighbors stared openly at the bizarre spectacle. Vivian saw me standing behind the bars. The sight of me safely enclosed within the $16 million estate completely broke whatever remained of her fragile mind. She lunged at the iron gates, gripping the black metal bars with her bare hands. She pressed her tear-stained face against the cold iron. "Maya, you cannot do this to me!" Vivian screamed, her voice tearing through the quiet suburban neighborhood. "I am your mother. I gave you life. I raised you in this house. How can you be so incredibly cruel to your own flesh and blood? Look at us. We are standing on the street. We have absolutely nothing. You are a monster. You are a heartless, vicious monster." I stood perfectly still, letting her scream. I did not flinch. I did not offer a single ounce of sympathy. "You call me cruel, Vivian," I replied, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotional warmth. "You think this is cruelty. Cruelty is throwing a 22-year-old girl out of her home because she processes letters differently than you do. Cruelty is mocking her mental health in front of your wealthy friends. Cruelty is stealing millions of dollars to fund a fake lifestyle while telling your daughter she is a worthless burden. I am not being cruel today. I am simply reflecting your exact behavior back at you." Richard stepped forward, pushing Vivian slightly aside. He gripped the iron bars, his knuckles turning stark white. "Maya, please," Richard begged, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance. "I will sign anything you want. I will work for you. I will manage the property. I will do whatever it takes. Just let us back inside. Marcus ruined everything. He manipulated the accounts. He lied to me about the funds. I was just trying to protect the family legacy. Do not punish us for his crimes." I laughed, a sharp, echoing sound that cut through his pathetic excuses. "You are blaming Marcus now?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You eagerly laundered stolen money through your shell companies, Richard. You signed the wire transfers. You took the capital. You both built this nightmare brick by brick. You do not get to play the victim just because the house finally collapsed on your head." Vivian slammed her fists frantically against the metal gate. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving violently. "We are your family," Vivian wailed, her voice cracking into a desperate shriek. "You are supposed to protect us. You are supposed to be loyal. We made mistakes, but you cannot just abandon us to the streets. You cannot turn your back on your own parents. How can you just stand there and let us lose everything? We need you to save us, Maya." I stepped closer to the iron bars, closing the distance until I was mere inches from my mother's frantic face. I looked directly into her terrified eyes. "I am the dumb one, remember?" I whispered, my words dropping like shards of absolute ice. "And dumb people do not know how to enable traitors." Vivian collapsed onto the hard, concrete sidewalk. A private security guard stepped outside and shoved 2 manila envelopes against Richard. "You have been served permanent restraining orders," I announced. I turned my back, leaving them trapped outside my life forever. I walked up the sweeping stone steps of the estate and never looked back. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut, sealing away the toxic noise of my past. I stood in the grand marble foyer, breathing in the crisp, quiet air. The crushing, suffocating weight that had sat heavily on my chest for 34 long years completely vanished, leaving behind a profound, undeniable sense of absolute clarity and profound peace. I pulled out my phone and executed a system-wide block on every single contact associated with my biological family. I wiped their phone numbers, deleted their email addresses, and instructed my legal team to intercept any physical mail. The permanent restraining orders ensured they could not approach my home, my office, or my person without facing immediate arrest. I was finally and unequivocally free. I spent the next few days working with my liquidation team to strip the mansion of its valuable assets. I had absolutely zero intention of living in the house where my childhood trauma was born. I ruthlessly sold off the vintage sports cars, auctioned off the expensive designer furniture to the highest corporate bidders, and put the massive $16 million estate back on the open real estate market. The property sold within a month to a foreign investor who planned to demolish it and build something entirely new. I found a deep poetic justice in watching the physical monument of my parents' arrogance reduced to rubble and cleared away forever, leaving a blank slate in its wake. I took the massive financial profits from the estate liquidation and combined them with a highly significant portion of my Vanguard medical acquisition funds. I did not buy luxury yachts, sprawling vacation homes, or private jets. Instead, I poured the massive capital into establishing a completely revolutionary educational foundation. I proudly named it the Iron Flower Initiative. I purchased a massive, sprawling, state-of-the-art campus just outside the city, specifically designed to support neurodivergent students. I hired highly elite educators, highly trained clinical psychologists, and specialized reading therapists. I wanted to build a sanctuary for children who process the world differently. I focused entirely on students struggling with severe dyslexia and those recovering from emotional abuse at home. I created the exact support system I had desperately needed when I was a scared little girl sitting in the dark, trying to decipher backwards letters while my parents mocked my silent struggles. I ensured no child walking through my doors would ever be called stupid or lazy by the adults entrusted to protect them. We built specialized coding boot camps within the curriculum showing these brilliant neurodivergent minds how to harness their unique cognitive processing powers and turn their perceived weaknesses into unparalleled technological strengths. Watching the foundation bloom became the greatest achievement of my entire life. I walked the bright, colorful halls of the campus, interacting with kids who were finally discovering their own hidden genius. I watched teenagers who had been discarded by traditional school systems suddenly thriving in advanced data architecture classes. They were writing complex algorithms, solving advanced logic puzzles, and realizing their brains were not defective but truly exceptional. I took the profound generational pain my family had weaponized against me and transformed it into a powerful engine of generational healing. While I was actively building futures, my former family was actively serving their respective sentences. My security team provided me with brief, mandatory legal updates regarding their current status. Marcus was convicted of federal wire fraud and massive corporate embezzlement, resulting in a lengthy term in a highly restrictive federal prison facility. Chloe filed for bankruptcy and divorce shortly after moving into a cramped, pest-infested studio apartment on the other side of the country. She was forced to take an entry-level administrative job because her prestigious Harvard degree was permanently tainted by her direct association with a massive financial scandal. Richard and Vivian moved to a rundown rental property in a different state, completely stripped of their country club status and their elite social circle. They had absolutely nothing left but each other and the bitter resentment of their own catastrophic failures. They had tried to steal my empire, and instead, they completely annihilated their own miserable lives. Exactly 1 year after the Vanguard acquisition, I stood in my sleek glass-enclosed penthouse office in downtown Manhattan. The morning sun poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the polished concrete floors in a warm golden light. I held a steaming mug of black coffee in my hands, letting the comforting heat slowly seep into my palms. I looked out over the sprawling city skyline, watching the millions of people moving through the bustling streets far below. My highly advanced predictive medical algorithms were currently operating perfectly in hundreds of top-tier hospitals, saving countless human lives across the globe every single day. My educational foundation was fully funded for the next 50 years, guaranteeing a safe haven for thousands of brilliant misunderstood children. I had constructed a fortress of immense wealth and undeniable impact entirely on my own terms. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, enjoying the absolute silence of my private sanctuary. I did not feel any lingering anger or sorrow. The dark shadows of my abusive past had been completely eradicated by the blinding light of my self-made success. My parents had mockingly called me the dumb one for my entire life. They had ruthlessly underestimated the quiet, observant, dyslexic girl sitting at the back of the room. They had let their insatiable greed blind them to the lethal intellect hiding behind my silence. They dug their graves and I handed them the shovels. I smiled at my reflection in the gleaming window glass. The fragile, scared girl they broke had died a long time ago. In her place stood a titan forged in iron and entirely unbreakable. I turned back to my desk, ready to conquer the new day. The most powerful lesson from Maya's journey is that your true worth is never defined by the limitations others project onto you. For decades, her toxic family weaponized her dyslexia, labeling her the dumb one to elevate their golden child. However, Maya fiercely refused to internalize their psychological abuse. She harnessed her unique neurodivergent mind to build a multi-million-dollar empire, proving that the exact traits people mock can become your ultimate superpower. True freedom begins the moment you stop seeking validation from those committed to misunderstanding you. Take charge of your own narrative and share how you transformed a perceived weakness into your greatest strength in the comments below.